Welcome to Veronica Live, and we are here with the author of Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater Mercenary in Iraq, and his name is Morgan Lerette. Welcome, Morgan, to Veronica Live.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, John and I were talking offline. Well, and I just want to say this too. You know, I messaged you, it's almost showtime, and you texted me back that you shaved your legs for this. So I was already dying, but the book is so good. It is so good. And then of course your Instagram, I was totally sucked into your Blackwater Dude 1 Instagram because you have all these pictures. But okay, before we start talking about the book, tell us about you, because the book is so good.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm kind of the poster child for joining the Army in the late 90s, or the military in the late 90s, right? Like small town USA, poor kid. The recruiters descended on us like flies on turds. So I joined the Air National Guard in 1999. And I was like, oh, this is great. And I started going to college because they give you all that college money. And then September 11th happened, and it absolutely just, changed my life plan that I didn't have. So we were activated for 2 years. I went to Oman, and then Pakistan, Jordan, Kuwait, and then Iraq during the ground offensive in 2003. And then when I got done with that, it's like, well, what do you do with your life? So I had a couple of buddies join Blackwater, and I just got a random phone call. That's how it went back then. It was all word of mouth. Got a random phone call, and the guy's like, hey, you want to join Blackwater? And I was like, no, I saw what happened in Fallujah in March 2004. And he's like, how about for $550 a day? And I said, yeah, I'll be there. Send me a plane ticket.
Well, and that's one of the things we'll talk about is money. So tell people that don't know what Blackwater is, what you all were tasked to do over there.
Yeah, so when Iraq moved from like a combat mission to a diplomatic mission, once they had their own little interim government, in all of its non-planning glory, the United States said, this is a diplomatic mission. Let's send all of our diplomats over there to help them build their country. And then they looked around and they saw that they didn't have anybody to protect those guys. So that's where Blackwater came in. And it didn't have to be Blackwater. It could have been DynCorp. It could have been Triple Canopy. Blackwater just was able to fill a contract because it had a lot of, people like me in the community that would go and work for them. So we would essentially take a diplomat or, one of those agency guys, and we would move them from point A to point B somewhere in Iraq. But you have to kind of put it in context. Like there's no GPS. There's no like creature comforts that we have now. So we just kind of had to figure out the mission as we went. And as long as we got the guy, to the polling station and then back without getting killed, we high-fived and then we grabbed a bunch of beers and drank at the pool.
Which I wanted to ask you, have you ever written anything before? Because the descriptions, just like when you got there and you ended up with diarrhea, and I was like reliving when I went to Panama after Operation Just Cause, and I was trapped in a house for 2 days because I couldn't get to a store to get the medicine because, you're a dumb lieutenant. You don't think you should pack these things. And just all of your descriptions from your athlete's foot to the sweat, I was so there with you on these missions. So talk about that.
Well,
have you written before? I mean, you're an excellent writer. I felt the heat going down my back.
Yeah, you get pulled right into the story.
Yeah, it's outstanding.
So when I first started writing, I had just had kids, and I realized there's no guide out there for like having children. So all these crazy things were happening that I had no idea what to expect, right? There's like all those books that are meant for new moms that are like, my wife's like, read this. And I was like, God, this is terrible. So I started writing a blog about having kids. Like, there's a reason why you put pajamas on them, because they'll tear their diaper off and then they will man pee right through the crib. Like all these crazy things. So that's where I started writing. And then I've had so many people tell me, like, these are the craziest stories I've ever heard. Please, God, put them down on paper. So that's how it started. I just did story by story and then finally started kind of putting it into a book format.
Well, it's excellent. So when you become a Blackwater person, because you've been in the Army, you've been issued a weapon. Now you're able to protect these diplomats. Is there how does your moral compass feel when you take people out? I guess because I've always flown a desk. It's really boring, taking care of fighter pilots, and I'm married to a fighter pilot. So how does that feel? Because it's a mission. You're very mission oriented. You know what you're there to do. You're protecting a U.S. diplomat, so it's clear cut.
It's not clear cut, and that's part of the problem. The one thing that always helped is that at the end of the day, we had this big money vault, and we would just like Scrooge McDuck swim through our money.
Right.
So that helps with the moral compass. But no, it's difficult because you're making these split-second decisions without the UCMJ, without laws that are necessarily governing you. So you have to make a decision based on like the morality of it and how intense it is on the ground, right? So car bombs were all the rage. If you guys spent any time in Baghdad, every car is painted like white with orange doors. And then they're like, there's a car bomb that's painted white and it's got orange doors. So if those cars are screaming up on you, what do? You have to engage that car, or you run the risk of it's going to blow up you, it's going to blow up the convoy, it's going to blow up the individual that you're protecting. So it's really like just that split second where you have to decide, am I going to pop my weapon off of safe and I'm going to engage, or am I going to just hope that this guy slows down? And as long as we could hit the pillow, at least myself, as long as I could hit the pillow at night and be able to sleep with what I had done, I was able to say, okay, I'm still doing sort of good. Well, those guys kind of hate me, but I'm doing good on this part.
Right.
So did y'all have any kind of like the military has rules of engagement? Did y'all have anything? Obviously, you didn't have a JAG officer in the middle of those, but is there anything that you operated under as far as that type of thing, or as you said, just your conscience?
Yeah. It's like Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder. That was about it. No, there was no set rules of engagement. And this is one of my, looking back, frustrations with private military contractors, because it sets up the contractor for a lot of liability if something goes wrong. They have somebody to say, oh, it was that person, right? The State Department wasn't going to take responsibility for hiring us. They could fire us on demand. But at the end of the day, it's really convenient for politicians and these department heads to say, oh, they did something wrong, except we have no real laws that are governing us, right? How are you going to have an investigation? If something bad happens, how are you going to have an investigation and the due process due to a U.S. citizen without being able to go and collect evidence in an active war zone? And it's a very difficult position to be in. If now in my 40s, I look at it and go, oh, God, that was insane. I could have been, spending life in jail if something bad happened. Mm-hmm. But in my 20s, I thought, oh, they got my back. They do not have your back.
Yeah. Well, so you didn't get the diplomatic protection or that not protection, the diplomatic immunity that the government people operate under. Is that correct?
So they told us that we did, and I'll tell you where they messed up is they actually gave us diplomatic passports issued under the U.S. State Department. But because we're dumb Blackwater guys, people started abusing it and like going to other countries and being like, I'm a U.S. diplomat. I get to skip the line going through the airport. So they took those away pretty quick after that. But we were essentially told you have diplomatic immunity. If something happens, we're going to get you out of country as fast as possible. You're going to be fine. And then in 2007, it turns out that that's not correct because the Raven 2-3 guys were prosecuted ad nauseum by the Obama and the Biden administration, even though they did everything that they thought was correct in that one situation. So I'm glad that nothing like that happened to me. But it's a very precarious position to be in as a private contractor.
I always thought that was odd because when I go over the seas on deployment, they'd always remind you, you're subject to U.S. law, even though you're in a foreign country, you can still be prosecuted under U.S. law in the U.S. for whatever you do here. And I always thought that was kind of an odd situation to be in.
So,
and that's
go ahead.
Well, I could pontificate about that forever, but yes, we knew we were under U.S. law, but how do you ensure due process in an active combat zone? Like, who's the person that's doing chain of custody? Who's the person that's cordoning off, the area and collecting evidence? You can't do that when people are dying around you. Right.
Well, I love in the book how you have these little conversations with people, and they're just so, like the Asian guy, I loved when you chatted with him. One of the moving ones is the medic. You're like, he says, headed home soon, and you're like, yeah, it's time. And he's like, well, I have no reason to go home. And you say, well, you're married. And then he talks about how his wife just filed for divorce, and he's there because she's going to take half the retirement, so he needs the money. So, I mean, that was a serious one, but you have kind of like, since I've lived in fighter pilot culture, everybody has a call sign. So, what was your call sign? Talk about that too, and these little stories that you have throughout the book of these conversations.
Okay, so call signs or handles are very difficult because usually you don't want them. Somebody gives them to you and then they stick, right? So I learned pretty quick that you don't want to answer to any of those ones that you don't like. So my call sign was always just Morgan. And people would say, oh, what if they hear about you on the radio? I'm like, look, if they can find a Morgan on these encrypted radios that we have with these billions of dollars that we spend on encryption, then they are more than welcome to send me a letter to my house. But they tried to call me Murdoch, the guy from the A-Team, the squirrely guy. They tried that for a while. So I got mail. What they used to do was, before we had a mailroom, is they would take all of our mail and they would throw it on this big table in our tent. And I walked in and people are like, I don't know if we should go out today. It's kind of chancy. And I was like, well, that's weird. And then somebody else was like, oh, well, it looks like there's a chancy of rain. And I was like, God, what is going on here? My middle name's Chansey. And they had seen my mail and it said Morgan Chansey Lerette. So I still have the Blackwater guys that reach out to me and say, hey, Chansey. And I'm like, oh, my God. Why did my parents give me that middle name? But the conversations, this is what I think a lot of people don't realize about combat, is that it's not Jason Bourne where every 15 minutes, hand-to-hand combat. 99% is boredom. And you're sitting there and you're trying to fill that time. And so you come up with just the craziest conversation. So my buddy Dave, the Asian guy, I didn't even know that you weren't supposed to say Oriental. So I was like, well, you're Oriental. And he's like, what am I, a soup? What am I,
yeah, that was a really funny one.
Yeah,
that was
a
cute
like, well, what
one.
do you want to be called? And he's like, Dave, but I'm Korean. So you have these conversations, and they're almost always like, if you had to do one thing to save the world, what would you do? And it's like, but why is the world ending? And then you can go on with this for like 8 to 10 hours, and it's some of the most lewd and hilarious. Like, if you were ever in the military, you could read this book and be like, oh, yeah, that's me, actually. I don't know
yes.
how you met me.
Well, I wanted to meet Funk Fake, because how many Funk Fakes have I met? And I was like, oh, that's hysterical. So that was like my favorite, kind of loser person.
Oh, yeah, the funk faker that goes around and tells everybody how awesome they are. It's like prison rules. Like, the first person you meet that wants to come talk to you because they got no friends. And there's a reason for it. And that's the person that comes up and tells you how awesome they were. And you have to take that as a grain of salt, because most people are not going to tell you what they did or how they did it back in the day until you actually get to know them. So, yeah, we got lots of funk fakers, because the funk is the cool, but he's faking it, so he's a funk faker.
Now,
I saw your comment there about officers and weapons. I thought that was kind of funny. There's a photo that was recently circulating that the Navy pulled down. It showed a ship's captain on the McCain firing, I don't know if it's M4 or whatever, something similar. But anyway, he had the scope on backwards. and
Oh yeah,
and
that
the
was
and
so
the grip
funny.
on the forestock was all the way back, and he was completely out of position, for firing the weapon. He was actually firing it because you could see the shell coming out, and everybody was commenting on it about what an idiot this guy was, and I saw that in your book there. You don't seem to have a whole lot of respect for military officers and weapon handlers.
And I was one, and that didn't help. The military. Well, what happens is you take all these guys that aren't used to carrying weapons, and this is across the branches. So, I can poke fun at the Navy or the Air Force, but most of these guys in the headquarters are not used to carrying specifically pistols.
No, because we shoot them once a year. That's all they let us play with them. If you're not a military police, Morgan.
No, I know, and that's the crazy part is they're like, hey, just put these live rounds in and walk around. But every time you walk into a building, you have to clear it, and then they don't drop the magazine. They clear it. They look down the barrel. They're doing almost everything right, and then at the end of it, you have to pull the trigger, and they put the slide forward. They pull the trigger, and they shoot the barrel. I mean, I think we probably wounded more clearing barrels over there than we did terrorists.
Oh, that's so funny. So I wanted to ask you, because I love your description of you guys were hanging out in Saddam's mansion with the pool, and the ambassador was in his master bedroom, and, so you're walking around this palatial thing in hell, talk about that.
Okay, so I grew up in the metropolis of Cottonwood, Arizona, and we don't have mansions down there. So when I got to Baghdad, even before I went to Baghdad, if I got to a Holiday Inn, I was living good, right? If they had pancakes, that's good living. So getting into Baghdad and actually seeing what a real mansion is, like a Rockefeller-type mansion, walk in and it's like marble or granite, floor to ceiling, and looking up at the ceilings, it's like a hand-carved wooden, with little designs in it. It's got chandeliers coming down like freaking Beauty and the Beast, right? Like it is absolutely gorgeous. And walking to the back of the palace is like this pool that's got to look like Mar-a-Lago. This is the only thing I can think Mar-a-Lago looks like. It's got like a little fountain, and it's spitting out water, and it's got 2 diving boards, and around it's all these little palm trees. I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous until the Blackwater guys got there and started drinking heavily on a nightly basis. And then we did our best to ruin it. There's always one person that's going to ruin it. It may as well be a Blackwater guy.
So, I wanted to ask you, too, about when you went, out and you were trying to buy stuff and they're pushing, because, Muslims don't drink, but the alcohol is very prevalent for purchase, and how they had porn. I mean, and, the kids are trying to get you to buy porn. So do you roll your eyes, or you kind of knew that was going to be there, having been in the Army? And isn't it silly that they live this lifestyle, yet it was so available to you?
Well, I realized that, kind of like you have Christians and Mormons, and then you have like your Jack Mormons, and you have the Christians that'll say they're Christians, and then, they're out there dating 8 different women. And it's the same thing with the Muslim religion, right? I thought it was going to be like The Handmaid's Tale, and everybody walks around with their burqas on. But they're just normal humans, and they have normal human vices. I mean, they smoke like a frickin' freight train. But they have this little bazaar, which is a little outdoor market, and they had gone in and just looted Baghdad. So I'm walking around this market, and at the very back of it, there's these like fine Chinese plates with Hitler's face on it. This is one of my biggest regrets. My grandma collects plates, and I grew up with my grandparents. And I looked at that plate, and they wanted $50, but I didn't have cash, so I was going to come back and get that plate so I could hand it to my grandma and be like, "Grandma, this plate reminds me of you. It's Hitler." And my grandma's the sweetest. My grandma's the sweetest person on the planet. But and then as we're walking out of the bazaar, the little kids come up and they got DVDs. Well, these are like the movies that are still in theaters in the U.S., where somebody goes in with a camera and they pirate it, and then they put it on DVDs for sale for us guys. And if you didn't want those, then they would try to sell you the porn DVDs. And I was like, oh my God, first off, how does this kid know English as well as he does? And second off, he knows like the filthy English, like dropping F-bombs, calling me every homosexual epithet that he possibly can. Like it is absolutely shocking. But when I wanted to go back and get the plate, they had blown up the bazaar and actually killed, I think, 5 contractors a couple days prior. Book. Yeah, so it kind of brought it all into like, holy crap, this is still real, right? Like people are still actively trying to blow us up, even within the confines of the very safe green zone, as they would say.
Well, so do you think a lot of it is the adrenaline rush? You said a lot of it was boredom, capped by a few minutes of real excitement. But is that adrenaline rush addictive? I mean, why do people, not necessarily you, but perhaps some of the other people, is there something that keeps drawing them into that lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, I say war is intoxicating, but it's toxic. It's like being an alcoholic, right? It's bad for you, but you're just going to keep doing it because you really enjoy the effects of it. So going overseas, it's the adrenaline, but there's a lot of guys that did it for 10, 15 years that never even left the base. They would just go play poker and they would go hang out at the fires at night. So it's also the brotherhood where you're sitting there with people that would literally give their life for you and you would give your life for them. And this is a Blackwater, this is military, this is everywhere where you have that esprit de corps and you just want to keep going back to it because especially with contractors, you come home and it's just you and your thoughts and you don't have little kids trying to sell you porn. Like you miss it somehow, if that makes any sense. So you're going to jump on your next contract. I can't tell you how many people, you mentioned the guy that like pretty much ended his marriage to keep contracting.
Yeah.
But there's so many people that would say, I'm going to go home for a month or 2 months. And then 3 weeks later, they would just be back. I'd say, what happened? It's, I was bored. So you just keep coming back. And it's almost like, and I didn't love the movie, but the Hurt Locker, it's that guy that just wants to keep coming back. That was the mentality with us Blackwater guys.
So one of I mean, you just nail everything in this book. The pageant queens overseas, because I was a pageant queen, Morgan, living in Panama and Germany for 6 years. And some men only want to date American women. So I could date anybody I wanted. But it was so funny because the girls that weren't pretty, sorry to say this, they were pageant queens only when they were overseas. So I was dying. I literally was dying because I've met these pageant queens. So you've just nailed everything, Morgan.
The overseas beauty queens. For those that don't know, when you go overseas, you gain like 3 to 4 points of pretty as a female. It doesn't matter.
It is so true.
It is so true. So I remember as an Army officer, I would go and like these guys, they're very fit, they're very handsome. We have this day where the families come out, mandatory fun day, and you look over and this guy's like married to a girl that looks like a toad. You're like, oh my God. Like David Petraeus' wife is the like perfect example. She looks like a toad, and I'm not even trying to be mean. But when you're overseas, there's no like American women. You're not going to go and try to like date somebody out in the red zone because you don't want to be the guy lured in and then you have your head chopped off on CNN. So there's a lot of single fit men and not very many women, and it's like a basketball game. It's like 5 guys fighting 5 other guys over one hole, right? It's just absolutely insane.
Well, I just thought that was really funny. So I wanted to know.
I was going to say, I was telling Veronica in the Navy, when I used to fly in the Navy, we had this theory called "Go Ugly Early."
John's going to write the sequel to your book.
Yeah, that was always entertaining.
Prequel. So I wanted to ask you, because we're running out of time, and the book is just it's guns, girls, and greed. It's if you want to feel what it's like to be overseas. Everything you depict, I felt it. But how did this change you as a human and now as a father? Because would you do it again? And that accountability word is so huge. Did it change you reflecting back?
Yeah, well, and this is kind of the problem with PMCs is that they are cheaper to send overseas than soldiers, right? You're not paying BAH for their family, healthcare, all this other stuff. But when they come home, it's just them. There's no VA. The suicide rate, the PTSD rate for contractors is extremely high because they spend years and years in a combat zone instead of doing a 6 to 12 month pump. Wow. So I would do it again at 23 as a single guy. I would definitely not do it again if I had like a family or any, like in my current situation, I absolutely wouldn't. And then you look at like the moral ambiguity and is the government going to have your back? Short answer is no, they're not going to. So I wouldn't do it. But it does change you. Like it turned me into this very hyper competitive person, just being around these special operations guys. So I wanted to come home and do everything like the best. I wanted to be the best. And that has helped me through my career. But at the same time, there's still those scars of being over there and some of the hairy things that we did that you can read about. Where I think, was it really worth it? So, you only live once, so you may as well just go with the life you got, right?
And what do you want to, as we wrap here, what do you want people to know? Because the book's on Amazon, Guns, Girls, and Greed. What do you want people to know about the book, Morgan?
Yeah, if you want a ground perspective of the war, whether you are a soldier, a soldier, this is the book. This is not, somebody up there, a journalist or a CEO talking about what happened. It's really the real people that did the real job. So that's kind of how I differentiate myself with this book. And it's hilarious. I don't even know how to say it's war comedy.
No, it's so good.
But it is pretty dang funny.
It is so good. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. We've been talking with Morgan Lerette, Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater mercenary in Iraq, and I want everybody to go out and get this on Amazon. And I got to have you back because we've got to talk. I want to talk politics next time with you, Morgan, not just about your amazing book.
Yeah, you've got my number, so, just call anytime. But if it's after 8:30, I'm in bed. I'm old now.
All right. Well, God bless you, and we'll be right back on Veronica Live.